I'd say one of the most fun DFS slates too, when there's two of them. Buckle your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Thursday matchup show, back for the first time of the 2021 season. I'm Dave Loughran. Hit me up on the Twitters at Loughy_D, Loughy_D. Joined every single Thursday for the next 17 weeks by Matt Savoca at Draftaholic on Twitter. Hit that man up. Get the follower count up. Very sharp fella, and you're about to find out why if you haven't yet. Matt, you know all about this show. The people that have been with us last year know all about this show. It's a ton of fun, but we get into the weeds in depth every game, try and set everyone up as good as we can heading into every single Sunday. What's up, brother? Good to be back with you.
So happy to be back here. Thrilled to get started, to really dig into the slate, player by player, game by game. Get your coffee, get a little breakfast in you, and let's get into this. So excited for football to be back.
Me too, man. Got the black coffee going on here. Second cup of the day. We're going to need it. Got 2 bottles of unopened water. You know, we're in it now, brother. We're happy to have all these guys. Oh, yeah. Happy to have you guys with us. Sit back. Enjoy the ride. Hopefully you're on a road trip or something. You know, this would be perfect. But no, in all seriousness, the best part is we got Jordan Klein behind the scenes producing the show. And if you're looking to go to one game, maybe you're watching this after the fact, skip around. That's why we have all of the game lists up on the left side of the screen on the sidebar. Make it a whole lot easier for you if you want to skip around. We'd love for you to hang out the whole time. But I know, time requirements permitting, sometimes it's not too easy. But we're going to do what we can. And Matt, as always, we'll spend the most times on the games that we think are most viable. There are going to be a couple games here where we'll hit on a player or two, but it's not our purpose. It's not our intention to rattle off every player from every game and then have your head spinning at the end because we've just talked about every player in the NFL.
Well, isn't that the point, too? Because in most DFS contests, we're going to have to narrow down our game.
Exactly.
Yes, a couple players are going to be standing out from any contest, but we're going to spend the time where you need to be spending your time this weekend.
Ready to dive into it, brother?
Let's go.
Let's do it. First game up, and this one to me is a fascinating one because there's so much uncertainty, is the Eagles at the Atlanta Falcons inside the Dome down south. Falcons laying 3.5 at home, 48-point total. We'll start with the Eagles. And the one thing that's intriguing to me is the Eagles could be really bad this year, or the offense, given that their offensive line is healthy. Lane Johnson played most of the year injured or he was out altogether. Jason Peters was, basically just a dead man who they propped up, which is so upsetting because he's an all-time Philly great.
He is.
But it's good that he's gone. Brandon Brooks missed the whole season. Mailata came out as just this completely ungroomed, undeveloped player and has looked good. Jason Kelsey is still there. Point I'm making is if this offensive line is good and they give Jalen Hurts time and Devontae Smith is good, we might actually be looking at an offense that isn't going to go to the playoffs or win 12 games, but could be good for DFS purposes. But ownership right now is reflecting a team that no one has any idea what to do with, and more importantly, just assumes they're going to be bad against an Atlanta defense that coughed up the league's highest yardage totals to opposing passers last year. So, love to hear your thoughts on this. What are we doing with the Philadelphia Eagles, specifically at their ownership right now?
Yeah, how could we not get excited about this specific game? We have a lot of circumstances that could result in a shootout. Remember, we want this game to hit the over. And if we're talking about a high total with the probability of hitting the over being high as well, I don't know how you can't look at this game as one of those, that top option there. So with the Eagles, I think we got to take advantage of the uncertainty right away. We have rushing upside and passing upside with Jalen Hurts if he can get his accuracy higher. And you know what helps your accuracy is more playmakers on the outside. Enter Devonta Smith, who I think is going to make an impact right away and has a really high chance of being the number 1 receiver for this team from the get-go. So we can take advantage of that. And even if they end up losing this game to a Falcons team that also is going to have a lot of different changes to their personnel on the offensive side of the ball, we could see some breakout performances right off the bat. And certainly some tournament winning performances here. There's a ton of upside. I really like Jalen Hurts. He's the 8th highest QB in terms of salary rank. The Awesemo projections had him higher than that. And in terms of expected fantasy points per game, he was kind of all over the place, but his highs are really high. And that's what we're looking for, especially in tournaments. I don't know if I'd go towards this game as much in cash, except for maybe some of the heavy hitters like Calvin Ridley. But I like Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders in tournaments. I certainly like Devonta Smith. We look at players early in the season that are definitely going to have higher salaries as we hit midseason. I guarantee you, almost guarantee you, Devonta Smith will have a higher salary than $4,500 on DraftKings in a few weeks.
Even 53 on FanDuel, right? Like we had a question in chat. What do you think of Quez Watkins at 4,600 on FanDuel? Just play Devonta Smith at 53. I mean, it's that simple. Do people worry about Devonta Smith's size and all of that? Sure. But listen, here's what it comes down to for me, Matt. If the guy can get open, none of that matters.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? I know the size, speed, all this analytics stuff that we can get into, and I'm certainly a fan of that. But I saw a guy tear up all of college football the last few months of his college
toughest
football
conference
career.
too.
I mean, I don't know how you can't get excited and say the ceiling isn't sky high for him. Yes, you're going to have Zach Ertz, who apparently massaged his relationship with the front office, and Dallas Goedert. And you know what? Having a great outside option like they hoped Jalen Reagor would be last year, and they really hope Devonta Smith will be this year, that might actually help this two tight end formation, get them open up the seam, and maybe some big chunk yards against an Atlanta defense who isn't going to scare anyone.
For sure. And Hurts targeted his tight ends almost 30% of the time last year in his starts. So, again, what we're saying is uncertainty is going to breed opportunity here. Very simple. Matt and I talked about that on the showdown slate today with, like, the backfield for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And more than anything is the ownership. If this was a super uncertain spot and all of the Eagles were coming in high owned, you and I would probably have different opinions here because the uncertainty breeds equal opportunity in fading a team that is going to be high owned. But, I mean, Jalen Hurts right now, Matt, and maybe this could change, 3% ownership. He's like the 14th highest owned quarterback right now. Devonta Smith at 4,500 is coming in at 3%. These guys are virtually unowned, and that's what makes them so appealing. Is there anyone else for Philly that stands out before we talk about the Falcons?
I mentioned Miles Sanders. I think he's going to get plenty of work in a game that could see a ton of points and a ton of plays overall. So in that case, we have a ton of running back options up at the top, but I don't think he's the worst play at all. Quez Watkins is actually somebody who, in really large tournaments, I would be okay playing. He could end up actually being a whole bit of nothing because he's really only made an impact in preseason, but in large field tournaments, you're going to have to differentiate yourself some way. And, we saw a guy who could make plays on the outside really fast, and he's certainly going to be probably 1% or under owned. But that really is for very specific contests.
The Atlanta side's kind of intriguing, too, because while Julio only played 7 games from start to finish, he was active in 9, but only played 7 games last year. He was still the wide receiver 3 in those games, and we'll talk about that when we get to the Tennessee game, which I'm just in love with. But more than anything, you have Kyle Pitts, who is an absolute athletic freak of nature. You can line him up pretty much anywhere on the field. And as far as blocking goes, could this be a learning experience? Is there a learning curve? Sure, but I don't anticipate him being awful, so he should stay on the field. And then you have Calvin Ridley, who already had a monster season last year, could easily be a top 5, should be a top 5 receiver this year. And then Mike Davis is in the backfield. So, and Russell Gage should see a decent target share. Actually was top 20 in targets last year, believe it or not, among the whole league. So there's a lot of changes here on a team that has averaged over 600 passing attempts per game over Matt Ryan's last 8 seasons. Per season, not per game. That'd be a lot.
That'd be a whole lot. But yeah, as you said, there's a ton of moving parts here, essentially, starting with that coaching staff. Arthur Smith coming in from Tennessee, and we are probably going to see a change in offensive philosophy somewhat. But I actually think we are overdoing it in terms of thinking that this Atlanta offense is going to morph into what we saw at Smith's last location.
Absolutely.
I think Smith is just going to take advantage of the talent that he has adequately, and that's Matt Ryan throwing his arm off, in my opinion. No, maybe we won't see 600 pass attempts this season, but I guarantee you Calvin Ridley is going to be utilized basically like Devontae Adams this season. He's going to be all over the field in terms of formations and in terms of types of targets. And I really think that you're going to want Kyle Pitts early as well. In this kind of uncertain matchup where the ownership isn't coming in that high, Kyle Pitts really stands out as a player who has the possibility of giving you that number one tight end overall performance. And people are uncertain. They're going to want to see it first. So I think you're still getting a value discount on Pitts compared to where you'll see him later in the season. I will say on FanDuel, he's priced specifically higher. He's almost tempting you to like move away from him. And I wonder if there's actually some contrarian options where you pay up for Pitts on FanDuel to create some more interesting lineups that way as well.
Isn't it funny that the two we're less than a game into this, and two guys you've already said in the same game? I think these guys are going to be a lot more expensive with much higher salaries later in the season than they are now. And I totally agree with you, but I think that's why this game is so interesting. And any smart person you listen talk about Arthur Smith, they say he takes advantage of what he has available to him. And in Tennessee, he had Derrick Henry available to him, right? I bet if he was still in Tennessee, he would make some adjustments because they have Julio Jones now. And you have Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts. And Mike Davis, who I think is fine, but he's not exactly an elite 3-down back. So, I'm with you, man. I think he takes advantage of this, and I think you could get a good year from Russell Gage. I think you could get amazing year from Ridley, and specifically this week, I really like Kyle Pitts as well. Jalen, even like a mini stack with a run back, with a Hurts, Devontae Smith, Pitts run back to me is really appealing.
Yeah, and the Eagles had trouble against tight ends last year. If you look at one of my favorite stats, fantasy
never have good
points
linebackers.
Over opponent average. Now, I know there's no average for Kyle Pitts yet, but I guarantee you, them being 25th in the league last year against the tight end, that's +1 for Pitts there.
Anything else here before we talk Jacksonville, Houston, baby?
Yes, let's go. Mike Davis, the 22nd highest running back salary. I see him meeting that expectation, but I don't see a lot of scenarios unless he falls in the end zone a couple times where he vastly exceeds that expectation. But it's worth mentioning that the Awesemo projections have him inside the top 20, and his expected fantasy points per game, albeit with Carolina, was in the top 15 amongst running backs on this slate last year. So he's not a terrible bet. We just have a ton of those premium options at running back that people are going to want to get to instead.
Yep, exactly. And really, in Carolina, it was a real mixed bag from Mike Davis. It's easy to look at where he finished for sure, but he had some really underwhelming games too. You rely on volume from Mike Davis and how involved in the passing game he's going to be for sure. He's a fine play, but not a priority. Is James Robinson in this Jacksonville game where, they might only be favored twice this year. It might be against Houston both times. They're laying 2.5 on the road, 45-point total. James Robinson right now, we have him actually projected sub 10% ownership. Do you think that is going to climb as we get closer to Sunday?
I think it's going to stay about steady, but you hit the nail on the head here. With the Jaguars in general, we're not sure how many times this season they're going to end up being favored, and they are favored against this Texans team. They certainly may be only favored against this Texans team once they play them again. I'm personally a little concerned that Carlos Hyde is going to take the goal line work away from James Robinson, which basically takes away from the whole purpose behind James Robinson, at least last year, because he got all the work. I believe in that drive where Trevor Lawrence threw a beautiful touchdown pass to Laviska Shenault. There was a touchdown called back, and it was a goal line rush for Carlos Hyde. So I just have a little bit of pause with James Robinson. I will say the Awesemo projections are pretty bullish on him, having him inside the top 10. And anytime you can get a top 10 running back for $6,400 on DraftKings, I'm listening, especially if he's a favorite. But I do think that the Jaguars are going to try to get Trevor Lawrence heavily involved, even in the red zone, just to get him more comfortable with his weaponry. I do have a little bit of interest in these passing game options, but we have to say there's a ton of uncertainty about how the target distribution is going to go out.
Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones is getting some ownership. I'd be interested to know how much of that was just based on the preseason too, Matt. People get hyped and now Marvin Jones is getting some attention, even though I think he was somewhat, I don't know, his ownership came down last I looked, but he's $3,600. Chenault is not much. What is Chenault ownership right now? I thought he was a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, it looks like 6.2% on DraftKings, around wide receiver 21.
So they're right around the same spot. And then you got DJ Shark at like 1.5%. As far as target share goes, it is very much a big question mark here. And Trevor Lawrence coming into his first game as a pro, I know he's NFL ready. I know he's the first overall pick, but that doesn't always translate to just an incredible start for any rookie. Are you looking to target the Jacksonville passing game? And if so, who would it be?
I don't think it's the worst game to build around because it's not going to be hyper popular, and the Texans defense is one of the
Your
worst.
mic volume just went low. Did you hit anything?
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see what happened. All right, turning it up now. How's that sound for you?
Down a little bit.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right.
There
how's
we go.
that?
There we go.
Okay, cool.
We're back in business.
Sorry about that, everyone. All right. Okay, yeah, I just think that the Houston defense showed us that they are not ready for playoffs or anything in February like that. So I think that we have one of the worst defenses in the league, and we have a lot of uncertainty related to one of the best prospects that we've seen over the last decade. Yes, we're going to have to be taking a chance with how these targets get distributed. But I really think that this offense has a chance to put up 3, maybe 4 passing touchdowns if things break completely their way. So I'm going to take a chance on Laviska Shenault in a lot of my lineups. Marvin Jones, because of the ownership, is a little bit less certain for me. But I personally think that he's going to be the wide receiver 1, at least through the start of the year. We'll see how things play out with the younger players in Chark and Shenault. But I think Jones could easily have the highest target share starting week 1.
Is there an argument to be made in like large field tournaments where you go, you know what? Maybe I'll get some lineups with Marvin Jones over Marquez Callaway at a massive ownership difference. I mean, Callaway is coming in at like 19% right now. Marvin Jones coming in around 6%. But obviously Callaway is primed to be the wide receiver 1 until Michael Thomas returns.
Yeah, based on what we know right now, there's no way we can't say that Marcus Callaway has a higher probability of gaining more targets than Marvin Jones.
Oh, yeah.
But there is a scenario that we play out on Sunday, and Marvin Jones equals the opportunity of Marquez Callaway just based on the way that Green Bay is probably going to shade their coverage because there's almost nobody else on the New Orleans side except for Kamara that they need to worry about. Whereas for Jacksonville, we could see DJ Chark just streak open for one play, and although the target distribution didn't go his way, he broke one against this poor Houston defense. So I think especially when you're thinking about large field tournaments, pivoting away from super high-owned players, especially when we don't know as much, like with Callaway, I think that's usually pretty sharp.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And look, we're not saying just heavily fade Callaway and go straight, overload on Marvin Jones. But we know that Marvin Jones is a proven player who, is also a viable threat inside the red zone. So I think there's something to that. Plus, this Houston, Matt, where do you see this Houston defense ranking this year?
I can't say it's going to be very high. Over the last 10 weeks of the season, they were a bottom 5 defense in defensive series success rate allowed, which is one of the main metrics I look at. It was even worse over the last 5 weeks. They were 4th worst in the league in that metric, and they just traded away Bradley Roby, almost in a sign saying, well, we might as well get this talent to somebody who can use him this season instead of having him waste away on our roster. So I don't think this team plans on winning a lot of games this season.
I think they hope that they don't.
Yeah, I think you can compare it to the Arizona situation with head coach Steve Wilkes a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And Josh Rosen ended up playing for 1 year, and that team just ended up with the number 1 pick and a whole new coaching staff the next year. That could very well happen. Drafted
another quarterback. Yeah.
But
that's smart. They knew it wasn't. They knew it wasn't going to work out with Rosen, and they changed course. The Houston Texans too. Look, they're only 2.5-point dogs. I know it's at home, but it does suggest that maybe this Jacksonville team isn't very good either, or isn't projected to be very good. Tyrod Taylor, though, is not the type of guy that you would really anticipate putting up big numbers. Can he run? Yeah, and that could be mildly helpful. But aside from that, man, it's tough. Brandon Cooks, I think Brandon Cooks is going to have an insane target share this season. I don't see any reason he would not. But on a slate where we have 13 games and 12 other games to choose from, it's tough for me to really get excited about anyone here. I can see maybe smaller slates, but I don't know, Matt. It just feels like Houston, while one or two guys might pop off, maybe Phillip Lindsay is the 3-down back, or maybe Brandon Cooks does have a 30% target share. How valuable is that on such a big slate, though?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Cooks makes sense to me because you get low ownership, you have high target share, and you have a playmaker who can essentially break one in one or two plays and put in a performance that you could absolutely use in rosters. But I don't see the upside really in Tyrod Taylor. I was really surprised, actually. We should mention that the Awesemo projections right now have Taylor at QB 10. That really surprised me, and that might just be because of the defense that he's playing this weekend. And the rushing upside that is definitely there. One thing, I know it was a small sample size before he was injured, giving way to Justin Herbert, but he actually was sixth in the league in expected fantasy points per game in the small sample size he played last year. But get this, Dave, minus 12.8 fantasy points below expectation in that start. That's way outside the top 30. Ooh. So what I saw in that small sample size in LA was a player who is highly inefficient, and I hope that's different. I like, the hard knocks scene with Tyrod Taylor. I like the guy, but I don't know, unless you're doing a large field tournament and you're really trying to be out there with your builds, why you need to go here. Maybe just to stack with Cooks and be different.
In the 3 seasons he started, he was the QB 15, QB 19, and QB 17, right? So like an average QB 17 finish. It's middle of the league. It's middle of the road. It's not great. It's not bad. But, we're talking years later. We're talking a guy that has very, very few weapons in this offense and very likely an inefficient run game. I guess the one silver lining is he could be playing from behind. And if that's the case, then maybe there's something there. I'm still having trouble getting to Tyrod Taylor, though. It's tough for me. Like, first of all, if you're stacking him, you only have Brandon Cooks. Do you feel comfortable with anyone else? I certainly don't.
I mean, Nico Collins, I know he's getting some buzz, but that's not the same kind of bet as Kyle Pitts or Devonta Smith when you're talking about rookies that could hit week 1. That's a definitely lower probability.
Absolutely agree. All right, so let's move on then. Talk Seattle and Indy, because this game, I think there's a lot to get into here for one reason. It's going vastly overlooked, and maybe it should be, but it has one of the higher totals on the slate, 50-point total. The Indianapolis Colts will get Carson Wentz back. Only 2.5-point dog, so less than a field goal dog at home. And the Seattle Seahawks, you're seeing a little ownership go to DK Metcalf, a little bit to Tyler Lockett, but really nothing going to Russell Wilson. It seems this could be one of those weeks where you get a shootout here, and Russ just, as they say, cooks. But nobody really wanted to stack the Seahawks. And I'm not saying it's a sure thing, obviously not. But anytime Russell Wilson is getting virtually no ownership and a game has a north of 50 total, I'm at least down to talk about it.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're here week 1. Let's just regroup why we're always talking about game totals. We talk about game totals because we want the game to not only hit that spot, but go over it. We're really searching for games that have 60, 70, 75 combined points. So we use Vegas totals to imply the probability of it going way higher than that. And because this is sort of the middle of the road in terms of Vegas totals, it's kind of going, I guess it's upper middle, we should say. It's going underlooked compared to those very, very high totals. And that always intrigues me when you have a fantastic quarterback in Russell Wilson and 2 mega playmakers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now, we had a conversation in the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel earlier in the summer about the volatility of Tyler Lockett and what that does to a season-long fantasy roster. But in a one-game slate, we're talking about a very, very different performer. Now, we can say that Metcalf probably has a higher probability of being a top 5 receiver, but that's reflected in his wide receiver 7 salary on DraftKings. When I look at Tyler Lockett, 12th in wide receiver salary, only 6,700 on a team that we know is going to have to score points because, say what you want about the Indianapolis offseason, and it's been a whirlwind of events, but they're coming into the season much more healthy than we thought they were going to be a month ago. So, yes, this could be one of those defensive slog playoff preview kind of battles, but I don't think that is actually the highest probability here. I think both offenses want to open things up, and it starts with Russell Wilson getting Metcalf and Lockett involved. I really like Lockett. Even though he's coming in the top 10 in projected ownership right now at 11%, I still think I'm going to get to him in a bunch of lineups.
And just to kind of nail on what you were saying, yeah, we had a long conversation about that. I think it was when we were doing the draft on Underdog. Tyler Lockett in season-long leagues is someone that I generally tend to avoid because unless you're playing like rotisserie points leagues, and I guess at best ball you could make that argument, but like if you're playing the head-to-head matchups, it doesn't help you when he has 3 massive weeks and then for the rest of the season he goes very much under the radar or he's just kind of non-existent. But what I do like is on a week such as this, Tyler Lockett can do what he does, even if it's 3-4 times a season, and win you tournaments. Last year, he had a 25% target share, almost 20% target share in the red zone. Metcalf was a 24% target share, 20% inside the red zone. So essentially, you're talking about 50% of all targets on this team went to 2 players. That's the type of concentrated offense you're looking for when a game does shoot out. So based on everything you said, if it does shoot out, we can be at least confident that we know where most of the targets are going. So it's not like with other teams where there's 5 options where you not only have to get it right that the game goes over and it's a shootout, but also you have to get it right that your guys are going to be targeted. In this case, we just need it to go over, and we know that these guys are going to get looks.
Hey, well said. And, I will say Alex Baker's been beating the drum for Chris Carson as a solid option on a great offense all summer long.
Love
and
it.
I think that he, at running back 17 in salary, under 6K, is a really, really solid option. I was a little disappointed to see that the ownership is actually coming in pretty high for him in the top 5 of running backs. I prefer Carson when everyone is looking towards the Seattle passing attack. And to be honest, if the ownership stays relatively low for the Seattle passing game, I'm probably going to stay there because Indianapolis is a little bit better of a defense against the run than they are the pass. So I think they're going to have to choose, as in Seattle will, to just go over the top, take shots at certain points, and I just want to be a part of that.
Agreed. Carson doesn't get a ton of respect. And I think one of the reasons is people don't consider him as a 3-down back, but he's a legit 3-down back. I mean, Carson can catch passes. I think he has, as far as receiving touchdowns goes, he has six receiving touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, of which he's missed 5 games. So when Carson – season long, I get the injury concern, but with DFS on a weekly basis, you're not worried about the injuries, right? Like you just play a guy if he's good. And yeah, this is an ownership thing. You're right. Carson, if he was the one going over, look, give me Carson all day. I'll still have some Carson because he's going to be on the field. And it's not like Rashad Penny really concerns me all that much. But yeah, I think we're on the same page when it comes to Seattle, Matt. It's a kind of a boom or bust spot, but if it booms, we're in business.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the Colts, though? I mean, they're just 0 ownership. Any run back options, or would you stack the Colts? Like the Seattle Seahawks last year were one of the worst defenses. They were allowing 30 points per game through the first half of the season. Second half of the season, they were allowing 15 points per game, albeit some easy matchups. But their offense was amazing early on because they were involved in shootouts. Second half of the season fizzled out, but the defense buckled down, and we saw Wilson go from the QB3 to the QB13 from the first to second half of the year. We just saw a big difference. But you have a new offensive coordinator. Things have changed. Maybe the defense is a little bit better. How do you approach the Colts today or Sunday?
So yeah, you said it. Seattle over the last 5 weeks of the season, in terms of that metric, defensive series success rate allowed. That's the amount of times they allow a team to get a first down or a touchdown in that 4-down set. They were a top 5 defense right next to Pittsburgh and Miami. That Seattle had a huge improvement. Now, I think the reality is that they're somewhere in the middle of where they were at the beginning of the season and where they were late in the season. But I got to talk about one player on the Indianapolis side I'm really excited about.
Pittman?
Paris Campbell.
Oh, Campbell. Okay, let's hear it.
I
love it.
Paris Campbell. I think that Paris Campbell, when healthy, is one of the most dynamic playmakers on the Colts. This is a player who was drafted higher than and outproduced Terry McLaurin on the same Ohio State team. A speedster, and he has 3,700 I mean, I see him at 5% ownership, but I think he could smash his wide receiver 60 salary this week. As a run back option, he's my favorite. I think there's a possibility that I'm wrong, and Michael Pittman is this alpha that they want him to be. They drafted him high in the second round last year, but I think Paris Campbell is the most dynamic, one broken tackle and you're gone kind of playmaker for the Colts. And I believe in his one healthy game last season, he had 9 targets.
That is interesting. And I don't disagree. Again, uncertainty here, but I don't disagree that Paris Campbell is somebody that could break one and just go. Not to mention, Carson Wentz has a real propensity to target his slot receivers. And I think you see Paris Campbell a lot out of the slot. If that's the case, especially in a Frank Reich offense, Paris Campbell could legitimately thrive. And you see Michael Pittman as someone that is more contested grabs, red zone targets. I actually think in their own right, both of them are interesting, Matt, because if this game shoots out, could Pittman be the one that has 2 touchdowns inside the red zone? Especially, T.Y. Hilton, not saying he's a red zone threat, but he's out for this game. So if they do keep up and Jonathan Taylor, not phased out, but isn't getting the same type of plotting workload, slow-paced movement as we've seen with the Colts before, it could be both of these guys. So I don't think as run back options, either of them are all that crazy in a stack here where you're stacking Wilson and the Seahawks.
Yeah, and if you want to go one step further, and this is probably for large field tournaments, if you put a stack of, say, Wilson and Lockett, Wilson, Metcalf, or theoretically if you have the salary space, both of those receivers, and you're looking to save salary, think about the game scenario where both of those players go off. I think you would see a ton more passing from the Indianapolis side. So the other player that comes to mind in that type of scenario, if the game plays out that way, you got it. I think you could see a ton of extra targets to the running back just to get those easy dump offs to keep the offense moving if they're in comeback mode. Not the most likely thing, but absolutely something that could happen this weekend.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you tell people this, they'll be like, what? Nyheim Hines and J.D. McKissic were 18th and 17th in terms of where they ranked at the end of the season in PPR formats last year at their position. That's crazy.
Yeah, because targets matter for running backs. And when you look at something like the amount of I use a metric called quality opportunities, rushes inside the 10, and targets, because they're both highly valuable compared to everything else. Nyheim Hines always comes out near the top of the league.
Yeah. This is a fun game. That's what I'll say. This is a fun game with a lot of different variations that you could make work. Just quickly, because I want to get to the Jets-Carolina, kind of exciting too, in its own right. Anything on Jonathan Taylor?
I think he has running back 5 salary is fair for him, and I think he has a solid probability of hitting that salary-based expectation. But, boy, just in the way that we laid out how this game could go, it's hard for me to see him being that running back 1 overall performance where you really needed to have him on a tournament-winning roster. So I'm probably looking elsewhere if I'm spending $8K on a player this week.
All right. Hey, hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so, guys. Let's get that to 100. And subscribe to the channel, too. Everybody's welcome here. We love all of you. We appreciate all you supporting us throughout the year. It's the first season, so let's do it big. Just hammer that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you're watching this after the fact, leave a comment down below. I see all of them. I try to respond to as many as I can. I'm sure Matt will be checking them out as well. So let us know what you think of all of these games, your favorite plays, anybody you think we missed or are wrong on. I'm open to all of it. All right, New York Jets, Carolina Panthers. The Jets come into this one facing, Darnold comes into this one facing his former team. Releases himself from the death grip of that New York Jets and Adam Gase team. They're 4-point favorites. So laying for 44-point total, though. So not really expected to see a ton of scoring. But I can't wait to hear your thoughts on, we'll start with the Jets. We'll do it the way we usually. I was going to say, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on Darnold and just the fact that he finally has an embarrassment of riches as far as offensive weapons go. But talk to me about Zach Wilson and Corey Davis and just this Jets offense, because I don't imagine it's going to take you all day.
Yeah, I'm not incredibly excited to get to them this week, but I do think that we can take advantage, just as we talked about with these rookies, we can take advantage of the stink of Adam Gase still being on this Jets team. And the bottom line is they have an entirely different coaching staff. If you watch some of the press conferences, the coaching staff to all the way down to Wilson even, this looks like a team that is talking differently, acting differently. I don't want to get whole narrative based, but there is a very different mentality towards the
kind of
Jets
exciting,
this
right?
season.
Kind of exciting.
Isn't the NFL better with more good teams?
Yeah.
So I would love to see the Jets move themselves out of the basement. And I think there is a decent probability we see them at least reach average in both offensive and defensive efficiency and production this season. So for week one, we got to look at it in terms of, is this production that we expect to be somewhat middling going to be consolidated enough for us to get excited about anyone? And I think Corey Davis is really interesting outside the top 30 in wide receiver salary, but I can't help but get excited about Elijah Moore at 3K. I really think we could see him be the wide receiver 2 right off the bat. I'm not saying it's the most likely, but I think that Elijah Moore is going to be incredibly good. He was a second-round pick out of Ole Miss, and if you look at the number of former players and current players talking about this guy being the truth, my antenna are perked up. There are some heavy hitters. Chad Ochocinco's been banging the drum for him. Odell Beckham said something about him being better than he was at his age. I get it. It's all talk. He's got to put it on the field. But I think this offense, even with Crowder possibly back from the COVID list this weekend, could be consolidated around Davis and Moore enough for them to be at least interesting options.
I can't wait for a slate where the Raiders are on it so I can hear how you feel about Brian Edwards, who they said looked like Jerry Rice and Terrell Owens. And then Derek Carr said he looked like Devontae Adams when they played together at Fresno State. Brian Adams could be good, don't get me wrong. Or Edwards, Brian Edwards could be good. But, you know, it is funny sometimes to hear people speak.
The hyperbole gets out of control.
It's great. But it's fun to talk about, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
And look, this is a guy that I've said all year long up till the draft. I like Elijah Moore, but to me it was crazy that he was going at one point a full round ahead of Corey Davis in best ball leagues and everywhere else. To me, that's nuts because I think while Corey Davis never lives up to the top 5 overall draft pick that he was, I still think he's a pretty good receiver. And, you know, last year he was 16 yards shy of 1,000 yards, only played 14 games. He was 4th in the league in 100-yard weeks. So Corey Davis actually had a pretty good year playing alongside A.J. Brown. Do I think he can be decent this year, have a decent target share? Does it look like his rapport is solid with Zach Wilson? And that maybe Elijah Moore missing time during camp in the preseason helped Corey Davis build that rapport? I think the answers to all of that are yes. Do I think anyone on this team is a priority this week? No, I don't. If you ended up with some Corey Davis, I don't hate it. He's 4,900. Again, I think he's pretty decent. Like you said, Matt, minimum salary, Elijah Moore, I don't hate it. Do I want to be super overweight on these guys? No, but I don't think you have to be if you want to get there. And that kind of brings you to Carolina. Sam Darnold last year had Brashad Perriman and Jamison Crowder and who I can't do. I honestly
Braxton Berrios.
Braxton Berrios. That was it.
Yes.
Thank you. Braxton Berrios, Denzel Mims, who, like, I don't even know if he'll touch the field this year. Now he has – and his running backs were Frank Gore and LaMichael P. You get the point. Now you have Christian McCaffrey. You have DJ Moore. You have a PPR monster in Robbie Anderson. You have Terrace Marshall Jr. This is insane, man. And it's crazy because I think I mentioned this on yesterday's show. Teddy Bridgewater targeted Moore and Anderson 47 combined times deep, 20-plus yards downfield last year. Why is that interesting? Because when Bridgewater started 6 games for the Saints, he had the lowest deep ball percentage in the league because it was a product of Michael Thomas just running slants and getting open and then having Alvin Kamara. But under Joe Brady, I think that you could see Sam Darnold, if they can fix him, and I don't think all of that was his fault, really open things up with the weapons he has. And last thing, Matt, I'll say is nobody was pressured more in the pocket than Sam Darnold, both in 2019 and in 2020 with the Jets. The Carolina Panthers don't have the best offensive line, but they can protect the quarterback. If the pieces of the puzzle were to come together for Sam Darnold, the place would be Carolina. I'm not saying it will, but it would be Carolina.
And let's, start with what the coaching staff and the front office did. They targeted Sam Darnold. They traded for him. And, we can say this was a mistake, from the outside looking in, but they chose Darnold over the quarterbacks that they thought would be there at the end of the top 10 where they were going to be picking. And then all they did was add Terrace Marshall, who was only available in the second round due to injury concerns, injury red flags. But so far, knock on wood, he's been healthy all through training camp. And of course, they're returning the best running back in all of football. So do I think this distribution of opportunity is going to be very different this season? I absolutely do. Like you said, I expect them to try to open up the passing game more than they did with Teddy Bridgewater, and I think they specifically targeted Darnold for that reason. And one of the reasons I think that we're going to see the same, maybe not the same level, but the same type of Ryan Tannehill renaissance that happened after he left Adam Gase is because
that would be nuts.
I mean, let's not get out of hand here. In terms of efficiency, Tannehill has been basically Patrick Mahomes over the last 25 games he's played in terms of efficiency. But with Darnold, his best football, the best football he put on tape was after he was briefly injured and benched in his first season, and he came back sort of playing cerebrally. I mean, this is a little bit narrative based, but that was his most efficient stretch of his career. And then once that coaching staff got their claws into him, then we started to see things fall off the rails. So I think Sam Darnold can prop up 3 viable fantasy players each week. But we got to remember, this was one of the most condensed offenses last year in terms of target shares with Davis and then Moore and Anderson. You got to assume a ton goes to McCaffrey, and then players like Terrace Marshall and Dan Arnold are good enough to make that distribution spread out to more players. So I think this offense could be much improved, but is it going to be beneficial for anyone but McCaffrey? I'm still not sure.
It's a good question, but are there going to be weeks where DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson pop off? I think there will be. And your concern is, I share your concern. The one opposition I would have to that is that Mike Davis still averaged 19 looks per game last year as a starter. So are more of them going to go to McCaffrey? Hands down, there's no debate there. But it's not like they just kind of emptied the backfield and didn't use Mike Davis once McCaffrey went down. Almost 20 looks per game is still a lot of opportunity. So while I think while we know McCaffrey gets more than that, maybe it doesn't completely overshadow what can be done in the passing game.
Yep, well said. And, and just in general for, looking at game environment, these are 2 defenses that at least last year couldn't really get off the field. So even if we see just mediocre efficiency from Darnold and from Zach Wilson, we may see defenses just letting easy plays happen anyway. And in that case, you are going to want a piece of that passing game. I think Anderson is priced up just a little bit at wide receiver 20 in salary, but he's seeing relatively low ownership, 6% right now. That's outside the top 20. And DJ Moore has projections right in line with salary-based expectations, so it could absolutely be higher than that. But I'm playing Christian McCaffrey in every single lineup I can possibly fit him into. It's that simple.
I love it. And I can't wait till we get to Alvin Kamara to discuss the difference in price there because, wow, it is insane. But, yes,
it is.
This could be a 40 fantasy point McCaffrey game, and you just kind of look at it and go, yeah, makes sense. Not a surprise at all. I don't disagree. But I wouldn't be shocked, though, if Darnold comes out and everyone kind of goes, oh, that's why he was drafted, what was it, 3rd or 4th overall, or second.
Yeah, when you look at volume and you combine it into one metric, that's why I'm always talking about expected fantasy points, that all that is the opportunity a quarterback creates or the opportunity a skill position player gets. He was 26th among quarterbacks in expected fantasy points per game. I can guarantee you that expected number is going to rank way higher for Carolina.
Big time. And, hey, more red zone trips if you got guys like McCaffrey and stuff. So just more opportunity to punch that ball into the end zone. Listen, I'm not over here crowning Sam Darnold and saying stack the Carolina Panthers in every lineup, but I think for the first time, a Sam Darnold-led team is actually kind of interesting. That's all. Minnesota and Cincinnati, Matt. We talk a lot about ownership here, too, and the top stacks tool and showdown single-game slates. Matt Kajeski and I just did a full showdown show on that. We have a deeper dive and a live before lock tonight starting at 6:30, so be there for that. If you want to get access to all of this stuff, we have single game showdown projections, ownership, rankings, all of that for $1 single if you use the promo code DAK, D-A-K, like the quarterback playing tonight. Awesemo Plus NFL Express Pass for $1. You can check it out. Not only that, all of our season-long stuff is now included. The in-season stuff, rest of season projections, waiver wire tools, start, sit, and a whole lot more. Actual main slate stuff, and we've included the tiers rankings and ownership and projections for that as well. So, I mean, just hands down, you're not going to get more for this price ever. For $1 single Express Pass, use the promo code DAC. And these tools created by Awesemo himself, Alex Baker, #1 ranked DFS player. He didn't just create them, he uses them himself, and he's won a lot of money doing so. So nothing to lose here outside of a single dollar, but consider it a small investment that could turn into something a whole lot more. Check it out. Go to awesemo.com/promos. And if you have any questions, you can DM me on Twitter. My DMs, maybe mistakenly, but they are open. Matt, Dalvin Cook and the Minnesota Vikings are field goal favorites against Cincinnati, a very, very questionable Cincinnati team as far as the offensive line goes and what the offense and defense will look like. 48-point total. You said you want to get McCaffrey in every lineup. We're going to talk about Alvin Kamara shortly. What do we do with Dalvin Cook in another very favorable spot?
Well, I personally, if you're building a cash lineup, I don't know how you don't start with McCaffrey, Cook, and figure it out from there, because we got wide receiver values everywhere. But I was just thinking as we went through and started talking about this game, how freaking cool is it that we can start the first main slate with Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Alvin Kamara, and Derrick Henry all on the same slate. We have so many game theory options depending on what type of contest we're playing. There's so much goodness here, and Dalvin Cook is in a great spot.
It's awesome. The only thing is your head starts spinning with all these good running backs.
I know. We can only fit so many with the salary cap. So, I mean, we're talking about the player who dominated fantasy leagues last year, over 20 DraftKings expected fantasy points per game, and was top 5 in the league in fantasy points scored over expectations. So hyper usage, hyper efficiency, and a team that was not very good against running backs last year in the Bengals. Do we need to say anything more? Okay, no. Well, the Minnesota offense is one of the most consolidated offense that you could have, usually 50 to 70 points per game coming from Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson. And I think the injury to Irv Smith pretty much confirmed we're getting that again.
Now, Adam Thielen's touchdown, he had 14 touchdowns.
Zone targets. They're concerning.
Yeah. He had a lot of touchdowns last year. But if you look at his touchdowns compared to his targets and red zone targets, you're going to be like, seems a little unsustainable. Now, don't get me wrong. You want to talk about a concentrated offense, and I think you just did. Irv Smith was supposed to be the guy to kind of get a little bit of that work, particularly in the red zone. He's an athletic freak. He's done for the year. So unless you're worried about, what is it, Tyler Conklin? Is it Conklin right now? It is, right?
Yes, that's what they're saying is going to be a replacement. Chris Herndon may see some time
Chris Herndon, the 9th. Like, I think when you just talk about overall concentration of an offense, there were more weeks last year. There was no team last year, I'm pretty sure, just going by memory, that had winning Millie Maker or large field tournament lineups where the quarterback was not in there, but the running back and a wide receiver were, whether it was Dalvin Cook and Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. There were several weeks where this team had both of those guys, Matt, and it just speaks to how concentrated this offense is. It means that they're just amazing fantasy options almost any week.
Here's an amazing stat for you. I was researching Thielen and Cook for an article earlier this summer, and I was looking at the correlation between Cook's scores and Thielen's scores. It's actually a negative correlation, meaning in general, as Cook scores more, Thielen scores less. But I found out that is highly influenced by Cook's 40-plus point games. The average scoring for Adam Thielen when Dalvin Cook scores 20 points over the last 2 seasons is over 20 fantasy points himself.
That's nuts.
That's the kind of when they're in good situations, we look for Vikings players, and the ownership isn't even that high. Thielen is 30th in wide receivers in ownership right now. So I think you could easily game stack this situation, or you could even say, you know what, the Bengals are a mess of a franchise. They're at least a year away. I'm going to have a low-key onslaught stack from the Vikings. I'm not saying it's the most likely thing where they just completely blow them out, but we know where the production is coming from, and we can expect solid production because of the Bengals defense not being anything to be worried about.
Yeah, and exactly. People say, well, yeah, but if I play this guy every time he scores, it takes away from this guy. Well, you think about it this way. Let's just say the Vikings go out and they score 35 points. Dalvin Cook, hopefully, or maybe not, it depends who you have, is probably not going to score all 35 of those points. But we have a pretty good idea where those points will be coming from. And if those points are coming from just 3 different guys, all of them can eat in the same game. I'm not saying all of them will, but all of them definitely can. So Onslaught's not totally out of the question. I mean, the tight end position at this point is a barren wasteland. I like it. What about Joe Mixon on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, with Giovanni Bernard going to Tampa Bay this year, I'm looking at a player who, in terms of expected usage, there aren't a lot of running backs outside of the premium tier, or that top 4 we talked about at the beginning of this game, that are going to have more opportunity, more expected fantasy points than Joe Mixon. Are they going to be of high quality? That is really what remains to be seen. He was 5th in expected fantasy points per game last year with over 18. Now, that is a big drop-off from a player like Christian McCaffrey, who has over 6 more expected fantasy points per game. So let's not pretend they're kind of the same just because he's running back 5. But the Minnesota Vikings were not good against opposing running backs last year. They ranked 22nd in fantasy points allowed above opponent average. So he's in a good spot here. And his salary's outside the top 12 running backs. I'm not going to fault you for playing Joe Mixon. He's just not going to be a priority player, especially when I see that he is running back 4 in terms of ownership, over 15% expected ownership. I'd rather go to him when he's less popular.
Yeah, that's a lot of ownership for sure. If we like the Vikings, and we say we do you have any interest in run backs with a T. Higgins or a Jamar Chase, who, I mean, you want to talk about the air coming out of the balloon there in terms of hype. Jamar Chase went from being like ultra hyped to now the guy can't catch a pass, but I don't think that's something to be worried about. It's also not something I'm targeting in week 1. But, Boyd, Chase, Higgins, anybody you like here?
Well, I think you said that best. I genuinely hope we're wrong about Jamar Chase's drops issue and that it all fades away with his production on the field. But it's at a point where I'm waiting a week to see it, whereas other players who have had nothing but good things happen to them or hype happen to them over the course of the offseason, I'm ready to bet. But I think there is some fundamental mispricing here with the wide receivers on Cincinnati. I think T. Higgins is a steal at 4,700, outside the top 40 wide receivers in salary. The Awesemo projections have him as a top 12 option at his position this week. I think that is a little bit bullish, a little bit bold, but just to talk about how bullish we are on T. Higgins this week. And same with Tyler Boyd. He has projections well ahead of salary-based expectation. He's just inside the top 30 and seeing less than 8% ownership. I really hope I'm wrong. I worry about this whole offense kind of imploding on itself again. I hope that Joe Burrow kind of elevates his game. He's more accurate, more efficient than he was last year. But we saw a team with a ton of volume, and that's exciting for fantasy, but really game-breaking performances come from efficiency, especially at the quarterback position. It's just hard to bet on one of them. If we do, I think it's T. Higgins for sure.
Arizona, Tennessee, baby. This is where I start to have some fun. I tweeted yesterday, Matt, and then I saw another tweet, which was interesting as well. So I'll relay both of them to you guys. But last year, okay, the average total points scored in Titans games was 59. If you remove that weird week 1 game, it was 61. That's crazy.
Absurd.
13 of 16 games went over 50 points. 7 of 16 went over 60, and 4 of 16 went over 70. When you got those over 70 games, or even a lot of those over 60 games, you were binking, or you were having a really good day. Oh, and by the way, someone asked, what is an onslaught? When Matt mentioned onslaught, just like full stacking a team. It doesn't mean you can't run them back, but like instead of just a skinny stack or a couple guys or a mini stack, then, you do that. So another one, Matt, was in the 26 games that Tannehill has started, which, by the way, in 2019, he was the QB3 in the 10 games he started, and he was a QB7 last year. In the 26 games he has started for the Titans, the games have gone over 21 4 and 1 to the over. 21 4 and 1 to the over in the 26 games he has started.
Oh my goodness.
One more time. 21 4 and 1. That seems impossible.
Well, there has been some talk about how over-unders or game totals need to stay within a certain range because essentially you can't put it too high or else, first of all, the number of bets coming on both sides starts to change drastically. But almost from a betting standpoint, it doesn't feel right to see a 55, 57 point over-under. But what you're saying is that's the most likely outcome, and an Arizona defense that basically has nobody at the cornerback position. I think it was a Mike Clay from ESPN tweet just talking about the lack of personnel and the lack of draft capital spent on the outside for the Arizona Cardinals. This is a team that is going to be relying on scoring points in order to stay in games. Yeah. And here's something cool about the Tennessee Titans. You don't actually have to decide, is it the passing attack or is it the rushing attack? Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry are actually highly positively correlated in terms of scoring. So in general, when Tannehill's scoring, so is Derrick Henry. In the same way we were talking about the Minnesota offense, yes, they added one player in Julio Jones, highly concentrated. This is a game you're going to want to be a part of, or you're specifically fading because it looks so good on paper.
Yes, for sure. It checks all the boxes though, Matt. That's the thing. It really does. Because let's not get it twisted here either. It's not like Tennessee's defense was world beaters last year either. Were they okay? Yeah, sure. They didn't lose games for Tennessee, but they weren't very good. If this game saw 75 total points, I wouldn't be shocked at all. So I love the concentrated offense approach with Tennessee. Julio Jones, A.J. Brown. If you want to go, Derrick Henry is actually one that's really interesting because, I obviously love Julio here. Very low projected ownership right now. I would imagine that comes up. A.J. Brown getting some. But Derrick Henry, because you talk about McCaffrey, because you talk about Dalvin Cook, because we're going to talk about Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry's the one guy that's kind of on the back burner. And I don't think that's wrong, especially given that he's not a pass-catching back. But is it possible that Derrick Henry is the driving force behind this offense, but Tannehill also produces? Yeah, I think it is. Is it crazy? And this is actually not a rhetorical question. Would it be crazy to have Julio Jones and Derrick Henry in the same lineup without Tannehill?
I don't think so. I think the same argument applies to the Vikings that we just talked about. And what's interesting, there's been some research, especially in something like a 3-entry or a single-entry tournament. It actually might make more sense to play a bunch of those Titans or Vikings all together, because in those types of tournaments, you can afford one player who doesn't hit their 3x, 4x, 5x value. You can afford one dud, essentially, if all of the others break out and have huge performances. So if you just get Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry in your lineup, and you get 2 massive performances out of 3, you're still pushing yourself way up the leaderboard. So absolutely.
It's going to be a fun game. We already know what's up with Tennessee. What about Arizona? Maybe a little bit more difficult to decipher, especially given that they have a quarterback who rushed for 12 touchdowns last year, some uncertainty in the backfield just given what James Conner's situation role will look like. Will he be the red zone back? What do you think here? And are you willing to play Edmonds with Kyler Murray if we assume that he's going to be the third down back, which for sure, well, the passing down back as well? Who do you like in the passing game and running backs? I'll let you run through it.
Yeah, in short, no, I'm probably not going to play Kyler Murray and Chase Edmonds together. When I roster Kyler Murray, I usually, not to say I won't stack him with Hopkins, a target monster like that, but what I'm really expecting from Kyler when I roster him is that I have a massive ceiling game, and that really comes via his legs, maybe even scoring multiple rushing touchdowns. So I don't feel a huge need to stack these rushing quarterbacks unless they're with their alpha receiver in DeAndre Hopkins. Now, one thing, I was alerted to the Next Gen Stats, which shows the routes run and where they are on the field. And I got to say, Cliff Kingsbury's usage of DeAndre Hopkins for most of the season last year was very uninspiring. Used on the left side of the field, a bunch of comeback routes, over the middle routes. Yes, I know he's running this air raid offense, but I'd love to see DeAndre Hopkins doing a lot more here. And so, yes, I think he's got a projection that is right in line with his wide receiver 4 salary, but he's got to score touchdowns in order for him to be a really big hit. So I don't think, in the same way I said with some other players, if I have $8K to spend, I'm not sure I'm getting to Hopkins, and I would much more likely spend it the $7,600 getting to Kyler and just hoping for a big rushing game.
Okay. The one nice thing about DeAndre Hopkins, even though you're right about just the uninspiring way that Kingsbury used him, is as a yak guy, yards after the catch guy, he can make defenders look really dumb, And he was third in yards after the catch last season. I would assume that you see a decent amount more of that this year. But you're right. He's just too good to be used in a vanilla fashion. That's pretty much what you're saying. All right. Anything else for this one?
I'm really interested to see how the running back game plays out, but I'm staying away from both Chase Edmonds and James Conner. There's just so much here, and I think there's better options in their salary range.
All right. San Francisco, Detroit. Matt, the San Francisco 49ers are going to be my survivor pick this week. I have a bunch where you have to pick against the spread. It's like a survivor league, but you pick against the spread. No one gets eliminated. It's just the point system. I'll very likely be going to the 49ers, even though they're on the road, laying 7.5. They're just such a better team than Detroit. And I throw away most of what I saw last year. The offensive line should be good. Probably a top 10 offensive line. Some of the best, and here's the big thing. Forget about pass protection for a second. Some of the best run blockers on that offensive line in the league. I love that. Garoppolo's back for now. Huge upgrade from C.J. Beathard and who was the other one? Mullins. And then defensively, you get Bosa back. You get D. Ford back. There were a lot of guys that were out last year. I just think this team's going to be very good. They play in a tough division and still have a win total of 10.5. The guys all disagreed with me yesterday, Matt Gajewski and Eric Lindquist. And I would assume you would too, because the price is a little bit high and there's some uncertainty there. But I still have some interest in Raheem Mostert. And I actually went and looked at his props. He has a 16.5 rushing attempt prop, which to me is A-okay on this team. He's like minus 200 to score. I know Trey Sermon's there, but Raheem Mostert still appeals to me against such a bad Detroit team where I think San Francisco is just going to control time of possession and run up the score. Floor's yours on San Francisco.
Well, I'll get into numbers in a minute, but I have, for weeks since the salaries for this week came out, I have been thinking that a San Francisco running back is going to win someone $1 million. Yep. So I'm not going to say no to Raheem Mostert because I think the San Francisco defense, especially being the high salary option, is going to be very, very low owned in tournaments. You can differentiate yourself with defense running back stack or defense tight end stack, because those two positions are highly correlated. I think Raheem Mostert or George Kittle could have monster performances against this atrocious Detroit Lions team. And for anyone who wasn't paying attention to the preseason game that the 49ers played against the Raiders, don't be surprised if you see Trey Lance out there for multiple plays in a drive or two plays in a series alone and basically running a Lamar Jackson offense 25% of the time, which could be lethal, to be honest. If both of them play to their potential, that could be absolutely impossible to prep for in 3 or 4 days like teams have to prepare for them. So, no, I don't think Trey Lance is going to get the starting job his own right away, but especially in week 1 against Detroit, this team could absolutely smash. I want parts of this offense, and so I know people are on Trey Sermon, but I think Raheem Mostert at the running back 19 in salary, I think he looks pretty good. I might be closer with you than the rest of the guys.
It sounds like it. And did you see in that game, too, some of those RPOs where Raheem Mostert just busted through a hole for 15 yards because you have no idea if Trey Lance is going to run the football or not?
I think maybe some fantasy gamers who are more in the numbers where I usually am, to be honest, may not be able to sort of quantify that, but you could drive a train through the running lanes that Raheem Mostert had. And so you're talking about one of the fastest, most explosive players in the league, able to get going through a hole.
Yeah.
I mean, good luck. Good luck.
You're not going to stop him. Look at the efficiency for the Baltimore Ravens run game with Lamar Jackson under center. Crazy. Now, we can't, like you said, you can't quantify it because we don't know how often Lance is going to be out there. But even if he isn't, you still really do have one of the best run blocking lines in the league in front of Raheem Mostert. And that's what I like. I just think when you consider the fact that they're more than touchdown favorites on the road, Raheem Mostert, when healthy, is actually a good running back. Like, Raheem Mostert's talented. He has less than 300 career carries. So, yes, he's getting up there in age, but he's not worn out. Great run blocking, good defense, awful Lions offense. Going to put the Niners in really fortuitous spots. It just feels like the stars align for Mostert to have a pretty big game.
Yeah, I agree. And what's cool, too, is that if you want to go with this game, but you're playing in a large field tournament and you feel you need to differentiate your lineup more than that, Deebo Samuel and Trey Sermon are solid pivots because the same argument could be made for them. It's just a lower probability outcome. So I don't think we're going to see Trey Sermon take over this backfield. We just said why, but it's certainly possible. We've seen these Jeff Wilson Jr. games before where the second or third string running back gets used, especially in the second half of a game they know that they're going to win, and Kyle Shanahan is just pulling out the tricks. I just completely agree here. It's really hard to even get excited about Detroit as a run back option, but if we must, there are a couple options here.
I remember the Jeff Wilson game last year because it was an afternoon slate, and I had a horrible 1 p.m. slate. And I said, let me get some Wilson in here just because like you said, we know how this team operates. And if a guy gets going, Shanahan will let him go. And he will let him. They always talk about committee. Yeah, it's a committee until someone's just crushing. That's kind of how Raheem Mostert took over. But, you're right. It was that 3-touchdown game against the New England Patriots for Jeff Wilson last year. Anyone can do it. And then what was it? Michael Hasty was another guy that everyone was high on. Wow, Wilson had a 183-yard rushing game with a receiving. Wow, he had some big games last year. Anyway, any thoughts on the Detroit Lions?
He's on the pup to start the season.
Right, yeah, which is good for us because it's going to be basically just Mostert and Trey Sermon.
That's right. It's really hard to get excited about the Lions. I really think this downgrade from Matthew Stafford to Jared Goff is unquantifiably bad. These are
That's rough.
One of the worst skill position sets, not including TJ Hawkinson, who's definitely a talent in his own right. But just like we saw last year, his salary is really high for a tight end. It's $4,900, which is third amongst tight ends. And he was only 6th in expected fantasy points last year with injuries all around him and Matthew Stafford at quarterback. So we're talking about best case scenario for him to be better than that tight end 3 salary. I guess Tyrell Williams is probably likely to outpace his 4,400 salary-based expectations. The Awesemo projections have him inside the top 35 and DeAndre Swift just inside the top 20. But I guess Swift because the expected usage. And maybe if it's a shootout, they just keep going to him and they don't really use Jamal Williams because they want to get Swift open in the passing game. That might be my only option there, but boy, this is tough to get to.
I was going to say, I think the only way Swift gets there is if he just crushes in the passing game because I have a very tough time believing against this defensive front for San Francisco and what I expect to be a solid pass rush, they're going to get much going. You pretty much said it. You're basically like, well, if I have to, maybe Swift, but there's no priorities here at all.
Yeah, and the only reason we're saying is hyper-talented player, absolutely no ownership, and a salary that doesn't match his matchup at all. But we have to say the most likely outcome, the Awesemo projection has him at running back 20. His salary is running back 9. That does not look like a great value.
No, that is wholly unappealing. So is a lot of this Pittsburgh team, but there are some talking points that we can make here, and they're 6.5-point dogs in Buffalo, 48.5-point total. I think it's reasonable that we actually start with Najee Harris here, just based on the volume we expect him to see. Drafted him first round. Nobody wants Roethlisberger throwing 40-plus times per game. Does Najee Harris fit into the equation for you this week at a low 6K price point?
Honestly, no. I think he's a hyper talented player, and he's going to have the usage. And he's running back 14 in salary. Do I expect running back 14 in expected fantasy points? Yeah, probably. But I think the most likely scenario in this game is that Josh Allen and company pass the crap out of the ball, and that Pittsburgh, whether they want to run the ball more often or not, is forced into a game scenario where they're going to have to use their 3 weapons on the outside. And so, yes, Najee Harris could absolutely get enough receiving work and red zone work to fall into the end zone and have a game where he hits value, but he's not super appealing. I guess one scenario it really does help is if they get down by a big amount. I don't think he's going to come out of the game and he's going to get those dump off passes to just move the chains. But
kind of like what we talked about with Swift, really.
Yeah, a slightly better situation because we think that Pittsburgh will at least be competitive. But I'm in general looking for this passing game. I'm still thinking more like last year.
Agreed. I would also say it's better too because there's no Jamal Williams in Pittsburgh, in the sense that I don't think there's going to be much competition behind Najee Harris, where with Williams, could he get a decent amount of work? It's possible. I don't know, but I'm pretty confident that like Benny Snell is not going to be getting a lot of opportunity, or Jalen Samuel, or whoever's in there, Anyway, actually, Jalen Samuel's in the practice squad.
Oh, that's right. I will say, if Pittsburgh is able to run the ball, even at an average efficiency, we are going to see a very different offense than last year, and probably a better one too, because they just could not at all last year.
No, awful run blocking. There was nothing there. Like yards before contact was awful for every running back on that team. It's interesting because Buffalo's pass defense, and we're going to talk about this, was very good, but they actually graded out as a bottom 5 run defense last year. I mean, that was one weakness for them. So basically, you got a run defense that could be marginally improved this year, but then the Pittsburgh Steelers, who can they capitalize on that? Can their offensive line create enough push to where they can actually exploit that weakness for Buffalo?
Yeah. Well, and that would be the scenario where I'm targeting this game, is where I say they can. Okay. Where they end up just being able to pass enough, and what we get is just 80 plus passes in this game. And then I just want the primary options. I want pieces of this. I want Deontay Johnson. I want Diggs on the other side. Or if I can't afford it, I'm going to Emmanuel Sanders and Chase Claypool. I could see a scenario where this game just is 2 pass-heavy teams, and the only thing that really works is the pass. I just don't think that, other than all the red zone usage, you could always see games where the passing game gets them within inside the 5, and then the running back takes it in. But I do see that scenario for Najee hitting more likely than a situation where Pittsburgh gets up, they're taking control of the game, and they're running out the clock. That's very unlikely.
Ty C took exception with your different and probably better offense comment, but the truth is, how many times have we seen this? That a running back is really only as good as his offensive line. I'm not saying a really good running back can't still be productive, but an offensive line is the driving force behind a running back. Look at Ezekiel Elliott last year when the line went down. Look at how inefficient at times Saquon Barkley has been running behind that line in New York. Are you telling me that Saquon Barkley wouldn't be just purely dominant running behind Cleveland's line? Offensive line is so important for running backs, Matt. It can't be overstated.
And balance between rush and pass. Now, not 50-50, but I guarantee you, even though passers are more efficient on a per play basis, that does not mean the perfect balance for a team is 100%, 0%. So we do not need to get into the data science weeds here, but running the ball better affects your passing game, which is still the strength of this offense, even if this could be Ben Roethlisberger's arm last year.
Yeah, that wouldn't be. The guy threw 40-plus times per game. No one spent less time in the pocket, and he got the ball out quick, which is why Juju Smith-Schuster as far as receptions went, was great, and then did nothing in terms of yardage, yards after the catch, yards per reception, yards per target, you name it. Deontay Johnson, similarly, didn't even put up 1,000 yards. Sure, he missed some games and got benched in one for dropping passes, but a lot of targets, 150 targets or whatever, a lot of receptions, not a ton of yards. So ultimately, and then Chase Claypool was the deep threat, but he was very hit or miss. Going to see a lot of Tre'Davious White. I can't say I'm particularly huge on this passing offense. Take a second on this, and then we'll go to Buffalo.
I like Deontay Johnson the best of them. I know he is the highest salary of all of them. He's wide receiver 14 in terms of salary, 6,300. But I think what you'll see is they're going to create space over the middle and then try to spread out, get Tre'Davious White basically on an island and get the other two solid Steelers receivers in advantageous positions. So Deontay Johnson first, and then for me it's Chase Claypool second, seeing under 6% ownership for Claypool. In terms of expecting a breakout year, I really do think Claypool could take that next step. And one thing I did notice is that the Bills against wide receiver ones, that's in terms of salary, they were 21st in the league specifically against wide receiver ones in fantasy points allowed above or below opponent average. So not perfect for Deontay Johnson, but as we said, a lot of passes, a situation where they're going to have to be fast-paced and passing a lot, and therefore it's got to go to somebody. I think Johnson's going to get him.
Okay. Let's keep it going. And yeah, Ty, saying, remember how good the Steelers were last time they had a top running back. I would make the argument, remember how good the Steelers were last time they had a good run-blocking line. In all of those years where Le'Veon Bell was one of the best, they were top 5, top 10 every single year in run blocking. It matters. That's all. Mm-hmm. It's a combination. That's all. Look how bad Le'Veon Bell was in New York. That's a perfect example. Le'Veon Bell went to the Jets with a putrid offense and no run blocking, and he got cut.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. I'm passionate about this because it's like you could put any running back behind an amazing line and I'll play him. That's all. Thoughts on Buffalo?
Allen and Diggs, let's try to get to him as much as possible. Diggs at the wide receiver 6 in terms of salary. It's just begging for you to play him. His projected ownership is approaching 20%. I don't care. Josh Allen is definitely on my list as well. You know, I still feel like I need to see a little bit more. Was last year a fluke for Josh Allen, or has he really corrected these accuracy issues we saw earlier in his career, and he's just a hyper-efficient, one of the best quarterbacks in the league now? What we can say is that the Steelers' defense is pretty strong. This is not your typical touchdown favorite kind of game for the Bills, and so there is a lot to lose by rostering Josh Allen as well, with the quarterback 3 in salary and the highest expected ownership of any quarterback. That said, I think you have sky-high upside for both of them in this game. And I believe when they I just don't have any concern about Diggs seeing under really 10 targets. And then the rest of it is just pure auxiliary. I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to have a huge role on this team. I think he's the wide receiver too. And then after that, it's just tournament options for Cole Beasley and for Gabriel Davis. I'm not interested in the running backs. I still think Josh Allen is the red zone back for this team.
I'm with you. How much Diggs do you anticipate yourself having at his price point?
I'm not gonna be below the field. I'm going to have at least the field, most likely over. I just think the salary savings there are so good. You know, that's why we're talking about all these 8K players that we weren't that excited about, because we have players like Stephon Diggs at 7,600 this week.
No doubt. Hey, Chargers, Washington, Austin Eckler is a non-participant yesterday in practice. Still waiting to see what we've got here. This is a little disconcerting, and it kind of stretches beyond that, Matt, because first of all, the game is wildly unappealing on a DFS standpoint on most levels. They are 1-point favorites on the road, traveling west to east, 44.5-point total. But then, God, like if Eckler sits, do I have to entertain the idea of Justin Jackson? I don't want to in this matchup. And honestly, we love backup running backs getting spot starts. It's great. But this is one of those days, and you actually touched on it earlier, talking about just how deep running back is, that I don't think the opportunity cost is worth it, even at minimum salary, if Eckler sits.
Remember Boston Scott free square week 1 last
Yeah.
year against this Washington defense? How'd that go for everyone else? Now,
You're right, that was against
year,
Washington. Yep, good call.
but I am not getting excited to play middling backup running back against one of the best rush defenses in the league, one of the best defensive lines in the league, period. Now, one thing that's really interesting about this game, if you're building lineups for large field tournaments, is that we have a low Vegas total. We have two defenses that their reputations are that they're really strong. Not to say that that's incorrect, but that's their reputations are that they're really strong. And we have two offenses that can blow the doors off if things go right for them. A lot of playmakers on both sides of the ball. And on Washington, of course, we have a new quarterback who's certainly going to open things up more. That means that people are just going to be off this game from an ownership perspective, but the shootout probability is not zero. That's what we really need to say. If we're looking at range of outcomes for these players, yes, the most likely is that they actually perform a little bit below expectations compared to what we saw last year. But you can't tell me that, especially if Austin Eckler isn't 100%. That isn't a boost, adding a couple of targets to Keenan Allen, to Mike Williams, possibly these two tight ends in Jared Cook and Donald Parham. I think Justin Herbert could be the next ascendant quarterback. We saw him in 7th in expected fantasy points and top 10 in fantasy points over expected per game last year. So he was being heavily utilized compared to other quarterbacks and was more efficient than other quarterbacks. This next step could be right away, even against a strong Washington team. So in tournaments, I'm going to take some shots on Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert, maybe a little Mike Williams too.
You know why Keenan Allen's interesting to me is if you have Chase Young and just a ferocious pass rush gunning for you, and Austin Eckler's not on the field, who is your safety valve on every single play? It's probably Keenan Allen across the middle. Like, he is the type of guy who, amazingly, it's funny because Keenan Allen last year was, I don't even think, he only played 14 games, so let's give him that. Didn't eclipse 1,000 yards, but he had 100 receptions in 14 games. Matt, could this be a game where Keenan Allen goes, I'm not even trying to go crazy here because I don't like the Chargers that much, but could Keenan Allen have 17 targets in a game like this if Austin Eckler's out? It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Again, I don't love this game in general. I still think it's going to be tough. Keenan Allen, to me, is the one guy, though, that stands out as if things begin to unravel, and if the conditions are as difficult for Herbert as I anticipate they will be, they're not going to not have a first down all game. They're not going to not score. Keenan Allen probably drives that offense and does so for 4 quarters.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the same way. We're thinking the same way. It's not the most likely thing, but let's not pretend it couldn't happen. So don't have it at 0% if you're making multiple lineups.
Any interest in the Washington side of the ball? Because I think the Chargers defense could be very good. I say that every year, and then they all get hurt.
I think that Antonio Gibson's salary, running back 17, under 6K, that's interesting to me. When you look at the Chargers defense is strong. They have a strong defensive line, but they are built to stop the pass more than the run. So I could see Antonio Gibson racking up decent yardage here. We're talking about a top 15 player in terms of fantasy points scored over expectation per game. I'm disappointed to see that the ownership, though, is coming in pretty high. 7th among running backs in a situation that doesn't look that great on paper. I guess price point is just really what it's all about.
Gotta be, right?
Yeah. I don't expect Curtis Samuel to play is one thing that I hope I'm wrong about, but the talk is not great about how he's doing right now. And Terry McLaurin has a pretty prohibitive salary, 13th among wide receivers. But no, I'm not super, super excited here. Maybe Logan Thomas as a mid-range tight end option. But really, the only thing I'm excited for is the possibility that sliver of possibility that Ryan Fitzpatrick is able to open up this offense right away in week 1. Just don't see it as very likely. Yeah,
me neither. Also, I don't think Chargers defense is the craziest idea either, because Fitzpatrick is the type of guy that is just there's no in between, there's no gray area with Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's either phenomenal or it's awful, and I think we could see one of the two because there's no gray area. But I have a fun question for you, Matt. Just a quick pick one of four. There are four guys priced within $200 of each other at the running back position. Which two would you prefer the most? Chris Carson, Antonio Gibson, Raheem Mostert, and David Johnson. I'm just kidding about David Johnson. I hope you don't want a $5,700 David Johnson. But no, really, Carson, Gibson, and Mostert, because I think in their own right, all of them are intriguing at their salaries.
I'm picking Carson and Mostert. I'm picking two favorites, and I'm picking the higher totals. Well, at least team totals, that is.
Same wavelength today, Matt. I'm digging it. It's good for all hopped up on black coffee.
That's right.
It's better than anything else I used to use. All right, so do you want to move on from this? Go to
I think we kind of settled on it. J.D. McKissic, if the Chargers take control in the same argument for Nyheim Hines that we had earlier, if the Chargers are able to get ahead, we're going to see some dump-off passes, and that means Logan Thomas and J.D. McKissic, who has a salary. Actually, it's a little high. It's 25th among running backs at $5,100, but absolutely no ownership. If we do see one of these 8-9 target games, he could really be a differentiator for you, even if he doesn't get into the end zone.
Love it. Hey, by the way, if you've seen up top, sponsor of today's show, is we've got Jordan Klein working the controls back there, making everything look nice. Prize Picks, sponsor of the show. I know a lot of you guys already play there and thoroughly enjoy it, but if you didn't know what it was, they got daily prop-based contests. It's super sleek UI, too. Everything looks good. It's super easy to use. They want to help you get started with a deposit bonus. You don't have to deal with sharks or optimizers or mass entries. None of that stuff. Not to mention, after you put your lineups in at DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever, come over to Prize Picks. It only takes a few minutes to put your lineups or put your picks together. This is what you do, right? Pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over or under their projected scores. Super simple. And the greatest thing, I say it all the time, you can use your DFS research. You can use what info we give you throughout these shows to kind of gauge what is right? And also base it off of other books too. Sometimes you can find some holes there that are huge. So that's all you do. If you correctly pick a 5-player lineup, you can net up to 10x your entry fee. And they got NBA, MLB, WNBA, esports, but what we care about right now, who cares about that other stuff? NFL, that's what we're talking about. And you can take advantage of the mixed sport, though. So if you're confident in other sports, you could do like 2 NFL picks, 2 MLB picks, whatever, throw 5 together, however you want. Download the app in the App Store or Google Play. Make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo and receive an instant bonus deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Now, Matt, I've got 2. You've got 2. I'll give you my first one. And the reason I saved this for now is because we're going to this next game. We're going to Kansas City and Cleveland. I will not be playing much Nick Chubb. However, I like over 72 rushing yards. Best run blocking team in the league, no question, against the Kansas City team who, they rebuilt their own offensive line, but this run defense is very likely going to be putrid again this season. I trust the Cleveland defense not to stop Kansas City, but to be at least good enough to where Nick Chubb is not abandoned. And Kevin Stefanski would not be wise to abandon him entirely unless they go down very early. Nick Chubb, as you guys know, I think is the best pure rusher in the league. I think he goes over 72. The advantage in the trenches is so significant that Chubb could have a monster game here. I'm taking over 72 rushing yards. What do you got for me, Matt?
Well, I was looking at playing tonight possibly, so I started looking at Cowboys, Buccaneers, and I look at some of the receptions totals, and I think based on the game flow, at Awesemo.com, we actually have the projected stats out for every player, so we can check this stuff specifically. Mike Evans, over under 4 receptions, he's projected for 8 targets. I think that is an easy over for him in a game where he should not have any trouble getting open. And on the same wavelength, if Tampa Bay is scoring, I think Ezekiel Elliott could also go over 3 receptions. He's projected on the Awesemo projections for 4 targets. But if that game gets out of hand, yes, Tony Pollard is there, but I could easily see an extra 2 to 3 targets going Elliott's way. I think over 3 receptions as well for him.
I dig it. Last one I got for you, Matt, let's stick to our guns here. Raheem Mostert, over a half a touchdown. So essentially, Raheem Mostert to score. That is juiced everywhere you look. Raheem Mostert to score is juiced to the yes, we'll say. Obviously, there isn't a no, but you know what I mean. He is favored to score. And I think the opportunities will be abundant enough inside the red zone and his ability to break it off to say, give me Raheem Mostert to score over half a touchdown. So Raheem Mostert to score. Check out Prize Picks. Download it in the App Store or Google Play Store. And, of course, use the promo code Awesemo. Get an instant match deposit bonus up to $100. Let's win some money, boys. Kansas City, Cleveland. Matt, 54-point total, came up from 52. I want to hear your thoughts on the Cleveland run game. Like I said, I don't anticipate having a ton of Nick Chubb just because he's a casualty of the depth at the position. But I think Cleveland can hang around. That's all I'm going to say. I think they can hang around a little bit and make it an interesting game where guys like Odell Beckham might actually pop off. We'll see. Where are you going with the Cleveland Browns?
Well, obviously, based on the Vegas totals, we're expecting a lot of points in this game. Now, as I mentioned previously, what we're really wanting is well over 54 points in the game. So we're really using the totals to identify the possibility of it going over. And really, the way that happens is the Cleveland Browns offense is smashing so that Kansas City is forced into doing its best offensive performances. And we know what they're capable on that side of the ball. So I'm not surprised to see that the Awesemo projections for Nick Chubb are way worse than his running back 7 salary-based expectations. They're outside the top 12 at the position. So I think you're exactly right to be fading him. But let's not pretend that the chances of him going for one of these Derrick Henry-esque 175 and 2 scores is impossible here. This offense is better no matter what you hear on the Twitter sphere with Odell Beckham in the lineup. They are able to do much, much more with the combination of Beckham and Landry. And don't forget about Austin Hooper, who is heavily utilized in this passing game, well, for the Browns. So Nick Chubb, only 3.4% ownership. That's outside the top 15 running backs. Yes, he has a prohibitive salary, but guess what? The Kansas City offense was 23rd in fantasy points allowed over expectations to running backs. They're not a fantastic rush defense, and Nick Chubb is a fantastic rusher.
Absolutely. And 2 years ago, Baker Mayfield had a pretty high deep ball percentage, 14%, right? But an adjusted completion percentage of under 40%. He only completed 35% of those deep balls. Odell Beckham had the second highest deep ball targets percentage in the league, but Baker Mayfield could not hit him. Now, last year, Odell Beckham only played 7, but he only played 2 snaps in week 7. And he was targeted a lot. And Baker Mayfield was better on the deep ball, even without having Odell Beckham for most of the season. If Baker Mayfield's deep ball is improved, Matt, this offense could be legitimately deadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not seeing a ton of ownership on either of the 2 pass game playmakers for such a high Vegas total and a high implied total for the underdog here in Cleveland. I'm really surprised to see both Beckham and Landry's ownership is pretty reduced.
It really is. Just the upside with those guys is exciting. Kansas City, it's not going to be easy to go full stacks here, but it's not impossible either. 54-point total. Highest implied total on the slate would be Kansas City by a pretty wide margin. Talk to me about Kelsey, Mahomes, Hill, and the like.
Well, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey are the top options at their position. And if you can fit them into your lineup, they are very good plays this week, as they are every single week that they're alive. So it really is a situation where if you go to our top stacks tool, it's like a joke. Looking at the percentage, the probability of the Kansas City stack being the highest probability stack or the highest scoring stack versus everyone else. We even have a value column, which is supposed to factor in their high salaries to try to have other teams percolate to the top. I believe the value number for Kansas City is 14. Yeah. Buffalo is at 7, and the rest are between 1 and 2.
And the leverage score is 16.8%.
They are better by a mile, and the only people that come close to them when you run the sims, as we do on the Awesemo tools, is Buffalo. So fit them in. Consider Mahomes and Kelsey a stack in your lineup, similar to how you would place Christian McCaffrey. That is the type of bet you are making. It's essentially a 2-player premium pick, which is fine if you can fit it. I will say, of course, Tyreek Hill has slate-breaking ability, but at wide receiver 2, the Awesemo projections are a little bit bearish on him. They have him outside the top 5. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, too, he scares me a little bit, but I think it's completely reasonable to say he's going to meet or exceed his running back 11 salary-based expectations.
I'm super bullish on Edwards-Helaire this year, but not as much in this matchup because when you contextualize everything and you're talking about salary now too, and not just like, hey, I like drafting him here as a good value for the whole season. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I love him this year. I don't think I'll have much of him this year or this week, and much of that matters because of the guys we talked about in that $5,900 range.
Yeah, and he's a little bit higher at $6,600. We really want to see the efficiency come up, and it was getting better at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, minus 1.3 fantasy points below expectation. That's outside the top 60 running backs. For a player with top 15 in expected fantasy points, if he puts even a little efficiency on that number, he could be a league winner. But he's still pretty risky at $6,600 this week.
Denver and the New York Giants. Ugh. Denver Broncos on the road, 2.5-point favorites, 41.5-point total. Very low total in this game. Matt, so we're not here all day, and I know there's a show coming up at 1 o'clock. I believe that is the Awesemo betting show. Be sure to check that out. Jordan, you're not producing that, right? You are. Oh, I'm sorry, bro.
Oh,
you knew this was going to go long. We'll get out of here as quick as we can. With Eitan and Ben over on the Awesemo Odds channel. Be sure to check that out. And, hey, follow our Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. You'll love it. We gained a ton of subs, a ton of love from all of you guys. If you're playing season long, we're going to have you covered throughout the entire season as well. Sub to that. Show us a little bit of love. And also, thank you. We are 3 away from 100 likes on today's show. About 400 people watching. Much love to all of you people. All right, Denver, New York. I'm going to let you take over here, Matt, because I don't have much to say about this game.
Yeah, I mean, this is as close to a stay-away option for me as you get. There is uncertainty at the running back position. I don't know if Melvin Gordon or Javonte Williams are going to have enough of a workload to make them viable DFS picks unless you're playing really large field tournaments. Teddy Bridgewater does have a projection ahead of his QB 25 salary-based expectations, but even this offense is expected to be spread out, and there's not much of it. So do I believe in Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Noah Fant as talents? Absolutely. Do I think they can be supported consistently? I do not. I hope I'm wrong about that, but in this case, even against a Giants defense that isn't the best in the league, but they are high quality, average against the run and better than average against the pass. Just not a whole lot to be excited about here. The Broncos defense, I should mention, comes in at number 1 on the slate in the Awesemo projections, despite a 7th ranked salary. So that's definitely something that perks my attention. And at 3,300, there definitely are worse options at the defense than the Broncos. I would definitely look there.
Okay. Anything else?
I mean, really, the Giants, what do you say about the Giants? Saquon Barkley, the projections are pretty bearish on him. Kenny Golladay is most likely going to play, but wide receiver 22 salary, 5,600. It's really hard to get excited, especially against a Broncos team that was 6th in the NFL in fantasy points allowed below opponent average last year. I just don't know what to expect from this Giants team, and it's a different discussion for a different day, but that Kadarius Toney pick was egregious.
I know. I'm glad we got Devonta Smith out of it, though, in the sense that we sniped him. Okay,
yeah.
Ready? Matt, snap decision. Yes or no, snap answer. If Saquon Barkley was $6,300, would you play him this week?
Yes.
Okay. I think I would, too. Just the upside.
Usage and upside, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Miami and New England. We got 2 to go. Guys, we got people hanging all show with us. I mean, we're just going. We knew this was a marathon.
Appreciate
it's a lot
you
of games.
all.
But is there any better way to prepare for a slate than to do this? You know?
I'd like to think not.
Me too. Miami, New England. Miami Dolphins are 3-point road dogs, 43-point total. So another low total game, Matt. I don't imagine we'll spend a ton of time here. You have Will Fuller, who is suspended for this first week, carrying over from the 5 games he missed last season with the PED suspension. And I'm just not very high on the Dolphins this week. I'm really not. Maybe a little Myles Gaskin, but I'm just not thrilled about them. And I think New England's defense is going to be markedly better than they were last year.
I agree there. And you know what? Respect to the Dolphins and their front office. They've done exactly what I would have done if I wasn't sure about Tua Tagovailoa's ultimate ability. I would flood the team with skill position talent, and they have a moderately good offensive line as well. And if he can't do it this year, then you have your answer, because they do have enough talent, especially when they get Will Fuller back week 2, to be a decent offensive team. Ryan Fitzpatrick showed us that they could do it last year. Now, I think Myles Gaskin is interesting here. He was 6th in expected fantasy points per game last year, and he's the running back 16 in salary. Now, the projections are a little bit bearish on him, but I think we've totally overblown the other running backs in the Miami running back room. I think Gaskin is going to get a large majority of the work. And anytime we can get a running back with 2% ownership who's going to get a huge majority of the work in a winnable game, even though they are underdogs, I'm interested. At 6K, he is absolutely not the worst. I was surprised to see the Awesemo projections are bullish on Devontae Parker, more so than Jalen Waddle, but even at wide receiver 24, the Awesemo projections see him as a buy at 5,500.
What about Damian Harris on the other side?
Yeah, I like it. And you know why? He doesn't get a lot of receptions. And I know we want receptions and we want goal line work, and there are questions for both. But if you look at projected touches and then you look at dollars per projected touch, Damian Harris comes out as one of the most valuable players in terms of dollars per projected touch and dollars per projected opportunity, and he's under 5% ownership. The Awesemo projections are slightly ahead of his running back 24 salary, and this is a player who, at least in the rushing game, was highly efficient. The Miami defense was high quality, but they were better against the pass than the rush. Not a priority spot, but at his price, I'm probably going to need a 5,200 running back in some of my lineups this week, and Damian Harris is definitely on my radar for that.
Anybody else from New England?
Yeah, I think Jacoby Myers is going to be the wide receiver 1 over there, but what I'm really excited about, and I think you could take chances on them in tournaments, just take a shot on the less expensive New England tight end, because both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry are way more talented than their projected median usage is right now. We could see a very unique offense. Not saying it's going to happen, but I think they'll see their looks, and the touchdown upside for both of them is high, especially with Mac Jones versus Cam Newton in there.
All right, Matt, 12 down, 1 to go. And it's a big one. I want to get Jordan out of here in time. And if I forgot to mention it, if anyone's interested in winning a full year of Awesemo Plus, everything on the site, literally every sport, every piece of content we have, it's $1,000 value. Go check out Awesemo_com on Twitter, the pinned tweet. Follow the directions. Who scores or who throws for more yards, Dak or Brady tonight? And do what you got to do to get that. Throw your hat in the ring. While you're there, follow Matt at Draftaholic. Follow me at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. All right, I'm losing my voice, and I got another show. So let's do this. Green Bay,
Yes.
New Orleans. The Saints, 4.5-point dogs. 50-point total here. Neutral stadium. This is played at the Jaguar Stadium in Jacksonville, Matt. So that's significant, given that they don't have that, comfy dome that has treated Drew Brees and company so well and likely would have benefited Winston too. But we'll start with Green Bay, and I will say this. I'll keep it very simple. Anytime you want to play Devontae Adams, who had a 30+% target share, led the league in red zone targets, had double-digit targets inside the 5-yard line last year as a wide receiver, and is the clear, undisputed alpha on this team and in the league, I'm okay with it. And New Orleans secondary, they didn't bring in Roby because they're great and they just need a little extra depth. No, they lost players, and the secondary could be a real issue. Roby's suspended week 1 anyway. I think Adams could absolutely annihilate this defense. And Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams connection is arguably the best in football. Floor is yours, man.
I don't have much to add there. Yeah, even though Marshawn Lattimore is on the other side of the field, and the players like Mike Evans have had trouble with him, not so for Devontae Adams. This is a player who is uniquely utilized all over the field, as you so eloquently put, and PFF in their wide receiver cornerback matchups chart for them, they put Devontae Adams matchup as a top-tier matchup in it for the receiver in Davante Adams' favor. So, yes, there are some more appealing options in terms of the quality of the receiver versus the poor defensive quality, but I am never going to say move away from Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers. I believe they both have games that are right in line with salary expectations. And remember, when you choose the number one option in a position group, you need them to meet salary-based expectations. You don't need them to vastly exceed it. You just need them to meet that. And Davante Adams is unlike any wide receiver because of the usage around the goal line. And if they're not getting towards the goal line, he's a target monster anyway. I'm not exactly excited to play Randall Cobb or any of these other wide receivers as well. Robert Tonyan, he intrigues me a little bit more. I know he had a heavy red zone usage and heavy end zone usage, but that's probably because he's talented. And I think that at 4,200, you could do worse, but let's not pretend. We are focusing on Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams stack as one of the best on the slate, and Aaron Jones as a pretty good, not great option at running back 10 in salary.
All right, that was succinct. I like it. New Orleans, Alvin Kamara, no Michael Thomas. Last year, when Michael Thomas was out, Alvin Kamara was the undisputed RB1, just in terms of where he ranked, just undisputed. And you could talk again about the fact that he scored 6 touchdowns in a game. He was still the RB1, even if you remove that game. So Alvin Kamara was fantastic. He's a great pass catcher. Latavius Murray's gone too. So I don't really know how this is going to work. Are we going to see Tony Jones Jr. soak up those 10 or so touches per game from Latavius Murray? Or is more of that going to go to Kamara on the ground, and then he just becomes even more of a dominant force than he already was last year against this Green Bay team? And they have a pretty reputable defense, Matt. But last year, Alvin Kamara absolutely went nuclear for, where is it here? He had only 58 yards rushing, but he had 13 receptions on 14 targets for 139 yards and 2 scores through the air. That's what this guy can do. He's unstoppable.
Yeah, and the run blocking grade on PFF for New Orleans was inside the top 10, I believe 8th overall in the league last year. They have a high-quality offensive line. And Green Bay, they were right at league average in terms of that defensive success rate allowed metric I talked about earlier, but they were second worst in the league against the rush. They had problems against running backs. 27th last year in fantasy points allowed over opponent average. And guess what? Alvin Kamara's average is pretty darn high. So I know. I said Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook are smash plays, but oh man. Alvin Kamara is in an awesome spot to start this season. And like you said, there is nobody there. Marcus Callaway had a great preseason. He hasn't done anything yet. Alvin Kamara is one of the best players in the league at his position in a spot where he has no excuse but to get heavy usage. I think it is really one of the biggest questions of the year. Does Alvin Kamara become this 25 touch guy or 25 opportunity guy each game? I think there's been some illusions in the past of Sean Payton thinking that he would get injured if that were to occur, but I don't know if they have really any other option to win football games, especially against quality opponents like the Packers. Right. This is going to be a game where we really see what New Orleans has for Kamara right off the bat.
And I do trust Sean Payton enough to find ways to get him the ball and move the ball. They figured it out. They've won games with Taysom Hill at quarterback. They've crushed teams with Teddy Bridgewater, and some of those Michael Thomas was out. So I know Sean Payton gets some hate once in a while, but the guy does know how to run a team. And I think Alvin Kamara will be utilized in myriad ways. So I dig it. Matt, let's close this one out. Marquez Callaway, and then if you want to talk Troutman or whoever else, is Traquan Smith going to be active? Do we have confirmation on that yet?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure there. And really, do we care so much about a player projected outside the top 50 at his position? Nope. Yes, it's possible.
And it looks like he's off the injury report. But, I mean, it's really Marquez Callaway here.
Yeah, and the bottom line is if the salaries came out in the timing that they usually do for a week, Marquez Callaway would not be 3,400 on DraftKings. He would not be the wide receiver 70 on DraftKings. He is mispriced. That is all true. But we're talking about game theory now. This is a player who's going to be 18% or higher owned. And so you really got to ask yourself a question. Does he really have a 20% plus chance of hitting? Are we really
Nope.
saying there's the same probability of, at least from an ownership perspective, of Marcus Callaway hitting his salary-based expectations as Stephon Diggs hitting his salary-based expectations? I really don't know. And it's not like the Green Bay secondary was susceptible to number one wide receivers last year. They were actually number 3 in the NFL at negative 2.7 fantasy points allowed under expectation per game. So this is an unproven player in a chalk spot, and it's difficult. Usually we don't want to be a part of that group.
Yeah, well put. That's why guys like Marvin Jones to me are kind of intriguing. Basically same price, way better matchup. Could be the wide receiver one. Maybe the opportunity share is a little bit different because you have good options on that team, but I don't know. I think there are pivots there, Matt, for sure.
I agree. Adam Troutman, he doesn't really intrigue me. I don't think he's 100%, and I think Juwan Johnson's going to play a role too in that hybrid tight end wide receiver role. So
yeah, and Steven says lock Callaway in cash though. Yes, I totally agree. Play him in cash. Just play him in cash. But anyway, Matt, that'll do it. Week 1. This has been awesome. Appreciate our Jordan Klein behind the scenes. The guy's just running. You want to talk marathon shifts? Guys up at 5 a.m. on the East Coast, just banging out production. Thanks, Jordan. Thank him in the comments, too. Say some nice words to Jordan. Again, Matt, they can find you at Draftaholic, myself at Loughy_D. See you back here later tonight. Showdown Deeper Dive, live before live. But Matt and I will be back next Thursday for week 2. Good luck, everybody. Catch you back here soon.